Most people are told their blood work is normal, but normal is not optimal. I'm Tanya Malik Chawla, and this is Biology by Design. Your biology is not something that happens to you, it is something you design. So let's get started.
I have a case I want to start with. 47-year-old woman, Hashimoto's thyroid, TSH at 9.2, free T4 at 0.53. Her endocrinologist told her to get on Thyronorm immediately. She came to me first. 8 weeks later, no medication, TSH down to 4.03, free T4 down to 0.82, inflammation down, energy restored. I'm going to spend this video on what we actually did and why it worked. Because if you understand the root cause of thyroid dysfunction from the biology by design perspective, you will never again accept a TSH result as your only answer. When you get a thyroid test in India, you almost always get one number, which is TSH, and you're told whether it's normal or not normal. Here's the first thing you should be asking: normal compared to what? And are we even measuring the right number? TSH is a pituitary hormone. It's your brain signaling your thyroid to produce T4. It tells you very little whether T4 is being made in the adequate quantity. It tells you very little whether T4 is being converted to T3. And it tells you very little about whether T3 is reaching your cells and activating the metabolic pathways it is supposed to activate. T3 is the active thyroid hormone. It is the hormone that drives your resting metabolic rate, your body temperature, your weight regulation, your gut motility, cognitive clarity, protein synthesis, and your hair growth. Without adequate free T3 at a cellular level, every one of those systems underperform. And with the current medical approach, you can manipulate your TSH into being completely normal while all the systems above continue to remain sluggish. This is not a hypothesis. This is a well-established thyroid physiology, and it is almost entirely absent from your routine thyroid management in India. There is also something called as reverse T3. When your body is under stress, physiological, inflammatory, or metabolic stress, it can shunt T4 away from active T3 and towards reverse T3. Reverse T3 occupies the exact same cellular receptors as T3 but does not activate it. It actually blocks it. So you have the precursor, you have the carrier, but the active hormone is being blocked at the level of the receptor, and your TSH continues to look normal. This is why functional medicine practitioners do not evaluate the thyroid through TSH alone. Always evaluate the entire system that produces, converts, transports, and activates thyroid hormones, and the system has 5 primary failure points. Let me show you those 5 failure points through the 47-year-old's case report, because every single one of them was present, and none of them were addressed on the panel her endocrinologist ordered. 5 root cause categories, every single one measurable, every single one addressable. Let's go through each one of them through the biology by design lens. A functional medicine or longevity practitioner evaluates thyroid dysfunction always starts with raw materials first, because your thyroid cannot produce hormones without having the right raw materials, and the conversion system cannot work without them. There are 4 critical nutrient cofactors, so I'm going to go through each one of them one by one. The first is iron. Iodothyronine dehydrogenase is the enzyme that converts T4 to T3, and this is iron dependent. Without enough iron, especially ferritin as an indicator of your iron stores, this enzyme cannot do its job. This case, the ferritin was at 23.6. Our biology by design optimal levels is 50 to 125. Her iron saturation was at 14.7. The functional threshold is around 25. She was not just iron insufficient, she was iron depleted. And iron deficiency anemia affects over 50% of women in India. This is not a rare finding, this is the default presentation. Second is selenium. Selenium is the primary cofactor for this enzyme family. India's soil is selenium depleted in many regions. Our vegetarian diets, which dominate India, provides minimal dietary selenium, and it is almost never supplemented. Third is zinc. Zinc is required for the synthesis and receptor activity of your thyroid hormones. It also supports the conversion of T4 to T3 and is necessary for TSH production. Zinc deficiency is widespread in India, particularly in populations on high phytate diets, which describes almost majority of our Indian vegetarian population. Phytates in your dal, wheat, whole grains bind zinc and prevent its absorption. And now, the one that nobody talks about in India anymore, iodine. See, iodine is the primary substrate for thyroid hormone synthesis. India introduced a mandatory iodization of salt in 1992 to address the widespread iodine deficiency that was causing goiter and cognitive impairment in large parts of the population. This was actually a significant public health intervention. But iodine deficiency has not disappeared, and there are three reasons behind it. First, many Indian households do not consistently or correctly use adequate iodized salt. Second, our cooking practices. Iodine is volatile. When iodized salt is added early in the cooking process, as it is commonly done in Indian cooking, significant iodine is actually lost. And third, soil iodine depletion in most regions is extremely common. Plus, certain category of foods commonly consumed in India contain goitrogen compounds that interfere with iodine uptake by your thyroid. Raw cruciferous vegetables, soy, millets, all significant parts of the Indian diet. And cooking does largely deactivate this, but of course, raw consumption does not. The second root cause is inflammation. And I mean systemic, chronic, low-grade inflammation, not the acute inflammation of an injury or infection, but the kind that sits quietly in the background and slowly degrades every biological system it touches. Specifically, elevated inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, IL-6 directly upregulate the enzymes that converts T4 to reverse T3 instead of active T3. So chronic inflammation does not just create symptoms, it actively redirects your thyroid hormone away from the pathways that make you feel well towards the pathways that blocks it. Now, my case report. Her HSCRP was 2.95. Our biology by design optimal levels is below 0.5. She was running at nearly 6 times the optimal threshold. From a functional medicine lens, the question is never just, is inflammation elevated? The question is, what is driving inflammation? And in this case, it was insulin resistance clubbed with gut permeability or a leaky gut from years of antibiotic use. These were the primary root causes. These were triggering the autoimmune thyroid process, which itself was further contributing to inflammation. Each of these required its own intervention. And as the inflammation came down over 8 weeks, the conversion pathways improved without any direct thyroid medication. ESR normalized from 22 to 7, and her thyroid function moved parallelly. This was not coincidence, this was mechanism. I want to spend more time on this one than most people do, because in my clinical experience, protein deficiency is the most commonly overlooked driver of thyroid dysfunction. And correcting it was one of the most significant interventions in this case. Here is the biology by design view of protein and thyroid. First, transport. Thyroid hormones do not travel freely through the bloodstream. They are bound to carrier proteins, primarily your thyroid binding globulin, thyroxine binding prealbumin, and albumin. All of these are proteins. If you are chronically under protein, you're not producing adequate carrier proteins, which means thyroid hormone cannot be transported effectively to the tissues that actually need it. Second, the enzyme substrate. The enzymes that convert T4 to T3 are selenoproteins. They require both selenium and adequate amino acids availability to be synthesized. Protein deficiency means the enzymes themselves cannot be built. And then third, and this is the one I want to spend the most time on, protein deficiency creates a state of catabolic stress. Remember, a catabolic state is one of the most profound physiological stressors the human body can experience. When your body does not have enough dietary protein, it begins to break down its own tissues, primarily its muscles, to meet its amino acid requirement. This state is known as catabolism. Catabolic state triggers the same hormonal stress cascade as any other major physiological stressor. What does that look like? Cortisol rises, the HPA axis activates, and as we discussed, elevated cortisol shunts T4 towards reverse T3. But there is more. The brain perceives catabolism as a state of resource scarcity, and in response, it purposely slows down your metabolism. It reduces T3 production. It increases reverse T3 production. Because from a purely evolutionary standpoint, when the body is consuming itself, slowing down just makes survival sense. And in this case report, the BUN levels were at 7.7, are optimal between 12 and 19. BUN or blood urea nitrogen is produced when protein is metabolized. A BUN below 10 in a non-disease context almost always means the individual is not eating enough protein to produce adequate urea. She was not just under-eating protein by a small margin, she was severely, chronically under-protein. Her creatinine was 0.64. Our optimal for women is 0.8 to 1.1. Creatinine is a byproduct of muscle creatine metabolism. Low creatinine signals a low muscle mass. She was not just under protein, she was sarcopenic. She was also losing muscle tissue. Her body was literally in active catabolism. This is a profound physiological stressor, and it was suppressing her thyroid conversion. And this was happening through at least 3 separate mechanisms simultaneously. And the intervention was specific. We increased her protein intake to meet minimum 100 grams every single day. For a woman her size, this was approximately 1.5 grams per kilogram of her body weight. A biology by design target, by the way, for active correction is 2 grams per kilogram of your ideal body weight. But we started conservatively given her compromised digestive function. We also introduced creatine. This is important to understand. Creatine supplementation is not just for athletic performance. In a catabolic patient, creatine serves a specific clinical function. It replenishes muscle phosphocreatine stores, which reduces the rate of muscle protein breakdown. It signals the body at a cellular level that resources are available. And this reduction in catabolic signaling directly reduces the HPA axis activation that was driving reverse T3 production. We also introduced structured resistance training. I've said this before, muscle is not a passive tissue. It is an endocrine organ. It produces myokines, anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. It is the primary site of glucose disposal, reducing insulin resistance. And the act of building muscle sends an anabolic signal to the entire body that directly counteracts the catabolic stress response that was suppressing thyroid conversion. She went from being near bed-bound to gym training in approximately 4 weeks. Not because of willpower, because her biology was finally receiving the signal it needed to shift from catabolism to anabolism. And as it did, her thyroid began responding. The 4th root cause is metabolic dysfunction, specifically insulin resistance. Insulin resistance impairs thyroid function through 3 pathways. First, direct conversion impairment. See, elevated insulin and the resulting glucose stress impairs the activity of the deiodinase conversion enzyme. Second, receptor sensitivity. Insulin resistance reduces cellular T3 receptor sensitivity, meaning when free T3 is adequately produced, the cells cannot receive the signal properly. In simple words, the doors exist but the lock is broken. Third is reverse T3 shunting. Insulin resistance is a chronic metabolic stressor, and as we discussed earlier, physiological stressors activates the pathway that produce reverse T3 rather than active T3. And in this report's case, fasting insulin was at 13.46, our optimal level below 5. She was insulin resistant significantly, and her triglycerides were at 172.7 against our optimal ranges below 90. Confirmed that her liver was under persistent glucose load. The functional health approach: fix insulin first, reduce glycemic load, protein first meal sequencing, post-meal movement. Even a 10-minute walk after each meal is one of the most evidence-backed glucose disposal strategies available. And then we added resistance training. because muscle is the primary glucose disposal organ. Her fasting insulin moved from 13.46 to 6.44 in just 4 weeks. Triglycerides came down from 172 to 104 in 8 weeks, and an insulin resistance improved. Thyroid conversion improved parallelly. Now, the fifth root cause is nervous system and the gut axis. Two interconnected systems that most thyroid protocols completely ignore. The nervous system first. Chronic HPA axis activation, what we commonly call chronic stress, does three things to your thyroid function. It suppresses TSH production at the pituitary level. It reduces your T4 output from your thyroid gland. And lastly, it shunts available T4 towards reverse T3 production instead of active T3. In this case, DHEAS was 37.4 mcg per deciliter against our optimal range of 275 to 390. She was operating approximately 15% of optimal adrenal androgen reserve. This is not a minor deficiency. It is a marker of profound and prolonged adrenal stress load. DHEA supplementation, sleep architecture work, magnesium supplementation and progesterone support were all part of the nervous system intervention. This was not just stress management, this was endocrine system reconstruction. Then we moved to the gut, because approximately 20% of your T4 to T3 conversion actually happens in your gut. Especially gut bacteria produce the enzyme sulfatase, which is required for peripheral thyroid hormonal conversion. When the gut microbiome diversity is compromised through repeated antibiotic use, like it was in this particular case, or chronic inflammation and poor diet, this conversion pathway is completely broken. In this case report, she had a history of recurrent UTIs requiring repeated antibiotic courses. Her gut microbiome had completely been disrupted multiple times. She also had history of NSAID use or painkillers, which further compromised gut barrier integrity. The gut intervention included probiotic yeast strains, complete gluten elimination, also very important in an autoimmune thyroid patient, and reduction of gut inflammatory load. Because in a patient with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, molecular mimicry between gliadin, the protein in gluten, and thyroid tissue is a well-documented mechanism of autoimmune thyroid triggers. Let me give you the biology by design framework as a practical tool. If you are on Thyronorm and still symptomatic, or if you have been told that your thyroid looks fine, but you know it isn't, here is what you should evaluate and the questions you should be asking your doctor. 1. Has my free T3 been tested? Not total T3, free T3. Has my ferritin been evaluated as a thyroid cofactor, not just for anemia? Has my iodine status been considered? Has my fasting insulin been tested? Have we evaluated my protein status? These are not alternative medicine questions. These are fundamental functional medicine questions. They have published mechanism evidence behind every single one of them. And this is the difference between managing a number and actually understanding your biology. In this case, she went back to her endocrinologist after 8 weeks. Her results were reviewed, and finally medication was not initiated. Of course, monitoring continues. The autoimmune process is ongoing. Hashimoto's does not disappear, but her thyroid is functioning within optimal ranges because the 5 systems that support thyroid function are now functioning within optimal ranges. That is the functional medicine approach to the thyroid. It is not suppress the system, medicate the number, but read the complete biological picture, identify the root cause, address the system, not just the organ in isolation. If your thyroid has only ever been evaluated through TSH levels, your thyroid has never fully been evaluated. Join the Biology by Design circle to access the complete biology dashboard. The links are in the description below. Remember, your biology is not something that happens to you, it is something you design.